set for 9 hikers driven by a mix of scientific curiosity and sheer grit as they began their ascent into the Ural Mountains. These were not amateurs. They had spent years training for this moment and were some of the most experienced mountaineers in the Soviet Union. Inside the thick canvas tent, the group settled in for a quiet evening after a grueling day climbing through deep snow. The small space was filled with the scent of wet wool and the quiet sounds of a group comfortable in each other's company. They had no reason to suspect this would be their final night. Then, in an instant, the peace broke. We cannot know for certain what they heard, but investigators now suggest a sound like a distant freight train may have roared somewhere high above in the black darkness. It is possible a heavy vibration shook the ground beneath their sleeping bags, making the air feel thick with an unnatural weight. Within seconds, the side of the tent was ripped open not from the outside by a predator, but from the inside by a desperate, panicked blade. The group scrambled out into the freezing night, wearing nothing but underwear and thin socks as they fled into a blinding white storm. They left behind their heavy leather boots, their thick coats, and every piece of equipment that could have kept them alive in the sub-zero temperatures. What happened in those few seconds to make 9 professionals choose certain death in the frozen void over staying one more moment inside that tent remains one of the greatest riddles of the modern age. Welcome to ****, Hushed History ****. Find a place where you can fully relax and let the outside world fade away as you get comfortable for the story I am sharing with you tonight. To understand the tragedy on that mountain, we have to go back to the 23rd of January, 1959. The group was led by a 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov, who was known for his calm nature and focus. He had assembled a team of 8 men and 2 women who were all students or graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Their goal was to reach the peak of Mount Otorden in the northern reaches of the Ural Mountains. This trip was classified as a Category 3 hike, the most difficult and dangerous level recognized by Soviet authorities. They began their journey by train to the town of Riddle, arriving amid high spirits. On January the 25th, they traveled by truck to a small settlement where they prepared skis and checked their wooden crates of food. One member, Yuri began to feel a sharp pain in his back and legs that made it impossible for him to continue. He said his final goodbyes and watched as the other 9 members disappeared into the white horizon, never knowing it would be the last time he saw them alive. The remaining hikers moved deeper into the forest, where trees were draped in heavy ice, and the silence was only broken by the slide of their skis. They kept a detailed diary and took dozens of photographs showing young people enjoying the challenge of the landscape. On February the 1st, they began moving up the side of the mountain towards a pass that would later be named in honor of their leader. The weather turned sour and a heavy fog rolled in, making it difficult to see more than a few feet. They realized they had drifted further west than intended, putting them on the exposed face of the dead mountain. Instead of going back down to the safety of the trees, Igor decided to pitch their tent right there on the 30-degree slope. He likely wanted to practice camping on an incline, or simply did not want to lose the height they had gained. They leveled a patch of snow and used their skis as a foundation before securing the tent against the winds. They ate a final meal of cold ham and bread as the temperature outside dropped to 30 degrees below zero. As the light faded, the 9 hikers crawled into their sleeping bags and drifted off, unaware the mountain was preparing to shift. By midnight, the world was a void of darkness and biting cold. Something was moving in the shadows, and the earth itself was deciding to reclaim the slope. The morning of February 26, 1959 was crisp and clear as the search party finally crested the ridge of the mountain. One of the student searchers, Mikhail Sharavin, spotted a dark shape through the white haze and realized it was the group's tent. As he approached, he saw that the canvas was shredded and half buried under a thick layer of heavy, compacted snow. Inside, the searchers found something that chilled them more than the wind because everything was exactly where it should have been. Their boots were lined up by the entrance, and their warm coats were still hanging from the support poles alongside a flask of medicinal alcohol. A plate of sliced fat and bread sat out, as if the group had been interrupted in the middle of a peaceful dinner. But the most disturbing detail was the way the tent had been opened, with several long, jagged slashes made from the inside out. The searchers stepped back and looked at the ground, where they saw a series of footprints leading away from the campsite in an orderly line. There were 9 sets of tracks, and most were made by people who were completely barefoot or wearing only thin socks in the freezing snow. The tracks did not show a group running in a blind panic, but rather walking together toward the safety of the tree line a mile away. The searchers followed the trail down the steep slope until they reached the edge of a massive, ancient cedar tree. Underneath its heavy branches, they found the remnants of a small fire and the first two bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were lying side by side, dressed in nothing but their underwear and thin shirts. Their hands were burned and their fingernails were torn, as if they had desperately tried to climb the tree to escape something on the ground. Nearby, the searchers found Igor Dyatlov and two other hikers lying in the snow at intervals between the cedar tree and the tent. They were positioned as if they had been trying to crawl back to the campsite in a final attempt to reach their warm clothing. Initial medical reports stated that all five had died from hypothermia and had no significant injuries. It appeared to be a tragic case of a group losing their way in a storm and freezing to death. However, the search for the remaining 4 members would take another 2 months and lead to a discovery that changed everything. In May 1959, as the snow began to melt, searchers followed a trail of broken branches into a deep ravine near the creek. Buried under 4 meters of packed snow, they found the final hikers, who were much better dressed than their companions. They were wearing layers of clothing that had been cut from the bodies of the friends who had died first at the cedar tree. When the doctors examined these 4 bodies, the theory of a simple accident fell apart. One man had a massive fracture in his skull so severe it would have rendered him unconscious instantly. Two others had their rib cages crushed inward with such force that a doctor compared the damage to being hit by a car at high speed. There were no bruises or soft tissue damage on the outside of their bodies, as if the bones had been broken by an invisible force. One of the women, Lyudmila Dubinina, was found with her tongue and eyes missing, and another man was found with his ribs broken on both sides. Soviet authorities were baffled, and the lead investigator noticed something even more unusual about the clothing. When he ran a Geiger counter over their sweaters and pants, the needle jumped as it detected traces of radioactivity. The investigation was suddenly and quietly closed, with the official report stating they had died from a compelling natural force. The files were tucked away in a secret archive, and the area was closed off to the public for years. Rumors spread of glowing orange spheres seen in the sky on the very night the hikers died. Some believed the military had been testing secret weapons, while others whispered about ancient spirits. Question remained: what could cause 9 experts to walk into a frozen void without their boots? For decades, the world looked at the crushed bones and the shredded tent of the Dyatlov group as a terrifying, impossible mystery. People whispered about secret weapons, extraterrestrial visitors, or ancient mountain spirits. But a group of modern scientists in Switzerland believe the answer is found in the physics of the snow itself. They used advanced computer modeling and data from car crash tests to simulate exactly what would happen if a specific type of snow slide, called a slab avalanche, hit that tent. A slab avalanche is not like the massive, tumbling waves of snow seen in movies. It is a single, heavy block of frozen crust that slides all at once. Igor and his group had cut a small ledge into the slope to protect their tent from the wind, and for hours that cut remained stable. But as the night grew colder and the winds grew stronger, a heavy layer of fresh snow began to build up on the slope directly above their heads. The weight of the new snow, combined with the cut they had made, created a perfect and invisible trap. Sometime around midnight, the weak layer of snow deep beneath the surface finally snapped with a sound that would have been like a gunshot echoing through the canvas. A massive slab of snow weighing several hundred pounds slid down the slope and slammed directly into the side of the tent while the hikers were still in their sleeping bags. The force of the impact was like being hit by a slow-moving vehicle. This explains why the bones of the hikers were crushed without any bruises on their skin. They were pinned against the hard floor of the tent as the heavy block of snow pressed down on them. In the dark and the chaos, the survivors likely believed the entire mountain was coming down. They used their knives to slash their way out into the night and fled toward the trees to escape what they thought was a second avalanche. They stayed there in the cold because they were terrified to return to the site of the impact. By the time the wind had cleared the snow away from the tent, the damage was done, and the hikers had already succumbed to the freezing air. Radioactivity found on their clothes was later traced back to the laboratory work some of the students had been doing at the university before the trip. The glowing spheres in the sky were likely the result of Soviet missile tests taking place hundreds of miles away on that same night. It was a perfect storm of natural disasters and human error that turned a simple training hike into one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. even with the precision of modern science, some pieces of the puzzle refuse to fit the frame. A slab avalanche is a mechanical force of weight. It can crush bone, but it cannot explain why a victim was found without her tongue or her eyes. And then there is the testimony of the original searchers. These were expert woodsmen who stood on that slope just weeks after the tragedy. They swore under oath that there was no debris, no sliding snow, and no sign of an avalanche. If a slab powerful enough to mimic a car crash hit that tent, how did it vanish so completely? And why did they walk in an orderly line into the dark rather than running for their lives? The story of the Dyatlov group is a reminder of how fragile life can be when we step into the untamed places of our world. As you sit here in the quiet of this moment, you might find yourself reflecting on the strange and silent paths that history often takes. If you have enjoyed this journey into the unknown, I invite you to join our growing community of investigators by clicking the button to follow our future work. By choosing to stay connected, you ensure that you will be the first to hear the next investigation as we continue to shine a light into the shadows of the past. I look forward to sharing our next discovery with you, and until then, I hope you carry a sense of peace with you as you return